Have you ever found yourself sitting in a quiet kitchen, staring at the phone, hoping today will be the day they call? You tell yourself they're busy, that it's nothing personal. But still, there's a part of you that aches. Not for attention, but for acknowledgement. A little moment where your child, now grown and caught up in their own whirlwind, remembers who you are to them, who you've always been. You raised them with your whole heart. You packed the lunches, cheered at every game, lost sleep over every fever, and helped them chase their dreams, even when it meant setting yours aside. And now, sometimes, it feels like you've become invisible, like you're a side character in the very story you helped write. It's one of the most painful things a parent can go through. Not anger, not even disappointment, but that quiet, lingering sense that you simply don't matter anymore. And I want to tell you something that might be hard to hear, but it's the first step to healing. You're not alone. And more importantly, you are not powerless. The story doesn't end here, not unless you let it. Today, we're talking about what to do when your adult children start treating you like you don't matter. Because the truth is, many parents feel this shift, but almost no one talks about it. And even fewer know how to respond in a way that restores not just the relationship, but also their own sense of self-worth. This isn't about guilt-tripping your kids or demanding respect. This is about reclaiming your value, about shifting the silent rules in your relationship. And it starts with 3 powerful transformations. The first one, it may surprise you. Let's begin with the hardest and most freeing shift of all. Stop begging for their attention. I know, easier said than done. But hear me out. There's a woman named Linda, a retired teacher, mother of 2. For years after her kids moved out, she lived in a constant state of readiness. If her son called and said he'd stop by, she'd cancel her book club, rearrange her week, delay doctor's appointments. She told herself it was love. And it was, in part. But it was also fear. Fear that if she didn't say yes to every last-minute request, she'd be left behind completely. The problem was, her son started treating her time like it didn't matter, because she treated her time like it didn't matter. When someone never asks you to make an effort, you don't learn to value them. And that's what happened. One day, after yet another rushed visit and hurried goodbye, Linda felt something shift. She sat down, took a breath, and decided something needed to change. The next time her son called asking to swing by that evening, she didn't jump. She smiled gently and said, "I'd love to see you, but I need a little notice now. 2 days in advance would be best." He huffed. He pushed back, but she didn't budge. And something incredible happened. The following month, he texted her to schedule coffee. He showed up on time, brought her a small plant for the table, and for the first time in years, she felt seen. Because here's the secret. People invest in what costs them something. If you rearrange your whole life just to fit into theirs, you teach them that you'll always be there, no matter how little effort they give. But when you start honoring your own time, your own joy, your own life, that's when they start noticing. That's when respect is reborn. I'm not saying you should play hard to get with your children. This isn't about playing games. It's about value. Yours. It starts small. Maybe you stop waiting by the phone and start taking that pottery class you've been curious about. Maybe you don't answer their call while you're out dancing or gardening. You call back later, calmly, with no apology. Maybe you stop offering to babysit on every holiday just because no one else wants to. You matter too. And every time you act like you do, you're sending a message. Not just to your children, but to yourself. Of course, this shift isn't easy, especially for parents whose identities were built around being available, saying yes to everything, being the rock. But here's the truth. Your job as a parent has evolved. You're no longer their chauffeur, their tutor, their midnight snack chef. You are a full human being in a new chapter of life. And in this chapter, your worth isn't measured by how quickly you jump to accommodate. It's measured by the peace and pride you carry when you walk into a room. I know what you might be thinking right now. If I stop making myself available, won't they just drift further away? Maybe, or maybe they'll realize what they've taken for granted. Maybe they'll start asking, not assuming. Maybe they'll begin treating you like a person with a life of your own, not just someone waiting in the wings. And even if they don't, something inside you will change. You'll feel a little stronger, a little more centered, a little more like the you that existed before you became mom or dad 24/7. That's not selfish. That's healing. And listen, this transformation isn't about creating distance. It's about creating dignity. When you stop begging for attention, you make space for real connection to come back. On equal ground. No more imbalance. No more silent hurt. Just two adults, parent and child, learning how to relate with mutual respect. So here's something simple you can try this week. The next time your child calls asking for something last minute, pause. Take a breath. And ask yourself, if this were a friend, how would I respond? If the answer is, I'd love to, but I'm already booked, then say that. If the answer is, yes, but I need some advance notice next time, say that. Say it kindly. Say it clearly. And then, let it be. You don't need to explain. You don't need to apologize for having a life. You just need to show them, by the way you treat yourself, that you are worth the same respect you once so freely gave. Because you are. You always have been. And when you stop begging for their attention, something remarkable starts to happen. You stop shrinking. You stop bending. And you begin to stand gracefully, powerfully, in the truth of who you are. It's the beginning of a new kind of relationship. One built not on obligation or guilt, but on earned respect. And that is a relationship worth having. Sometimes the hardest part isn't the silence between you and your child. It's what you feel tempted to fill it with. You want to explain, defend, remind them of everything you've done, everything you still do, everything they've forgotten. You want to be heard, truly heard, not just nodded at, not just tolerated. And so you talk, you explain, you bring it up, gently at first, then maybe with a bit more edge. You hope that the right words will break through. But here's something few parents ever realize until much later. The more you chase their attention with words, the less they hear you. You see, when we feel disrespected, it's natural to try and fix that with logic, with conversation, with reason. But adult children aren't always ready to listen, especially if they feel pressured, judged, or controlled, even if that's not what you intended. There's a quiet strength in restraint, a kind of wisdom that doesn't shout to be heard. Let me tell you about Robert. He was a gentle soul, a father of 3, widowed early, raised his children with both tenderness and discipline. His middle daughter, Melanie, had always been fiery, independent, strong-willed. When she got married, Robert had concerns. He noticed red flags, things her husband said, ways he acted. He tried to warn her, not in a harsh way, just honest. But Melanie shut him down, said he was too old-fashioned, too negative. One day she even mocked his advice in front of her siblings, laughing it off like he didn't understand anything about modern relationships. Robert could have argued, could have reminded her of all the times he'd been right in the past, could have listed all the sacrifices he made so she could grow up confident enough to challenge him. But he didn't. Instead, he paused. He looked at her with calm, kind eyes and simply said, "I'll always be here when you're ready." Then he changed the subject. That one line carried more weight than a dozen lectures. And 6 months later, after her marriage had unraveled and the dust began to settle, Melanie showed up at his front door in tears. Because he didn't try to win the moment, he won her trust. Because he didn't push his voice louder, she remembered his strength when things got quiet. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. Just presence. Just peace. Just patience. Now, this doesn't mean you let your adult children walk all over you or pretend everything is fine when it's not. It means you choose your words like pearls, not pebbles. Carefully, thoughtfully, knowing they're rare and precious. When you speak less, people start listening more. I know it's tempting to fill the silence with reminders, with advice, with requests for appreciation. But here's the truth. The older we get, the more our presence becomes the message. You don't have to say you deserve respect. You can show it in how you carry yourself. Every time you speak with calm, measured dignity, you give your children a chance to rise to that level. You invite maturity instead of resistance. You model what adulthood can look like, balanced, self-assured, and not easily rattled. Let's bring it closer to home. When was the last time you felt hurt by something your child said or didn't say, and your first instinct was to set the record straight? To explain your side? That urge is real. It comes from a place of love and longing. But try this instead. Wait, just for a day. Let your emotions settle. Write it down if you need to. And then, when you're ready, speak in short, clear truths. Not from a place of anger. Not from a place of guilt. But from a place of self-respect. Say things like, "I'm not here to argue. I just wanted you to know I felt dismissed in that conversation." Or, "I'm always open to talking when we can speak to each other with kindness." Short, true, clean. Then leave it there. Let them carry the weight of that honesty. Let them process. Let them wonder, did I cross a line, instead of reacting to a lecture? Because here's what often happens. When you speak less, your children begin to notice what's not being said. The warmth that's missing. The distance they didn't mean to create. And that space, that silence, can become a mirror. One they weren't ready to look into before. You're not withholding love. You're protecting peace. And that's what creates the environment for real connection to grow again. Not tension, not lectures, not guilt, but quiet dignity. Now I know some of you are thinking, but if I don't say something, they'll never know how I feel. That's fair. But you're not giving up your voice, you're sharpening it. You're choosing quality over quantity. And when your words finally do come, they land. They matter. They don't get lost in a sea of noise. You become a presence they respect, not a voice they avoid. Let's take a moment and think. What's one recent moment where you tried to explain yourself, and it didn't go the way you hoped? Could you have said less and meant more? That's the shift. Not silence out of fear, but restraint out of confidence. Because when you know your worth, you don't have to prove it. And the people who love you, truly love you, will feel it, even if it takes time. So the next time you feel the urge to defend, correct, or push for understanding, pause, breathe, and remember Robert. Let your silence be an open door, not a slammed one. Let your words be few, but full. Because at this stage in life, you've earned the right to be heard. Not by shouting louder, but by standing taller. They'll come around. Maybe not today. Maybe not in the way you hope. But respect always finds its way back to still waters. And you? You deserve to live in peace. Not just in the quiet of your home, but in the quiet confidence of knowing you've said what needed to be said and let the rest go. There's a strange thing that happens as we get older. After a lifetime of being the sun around which everything else revolved, school schedules, soccer games, family dinners. You wake up one day and realize the orbit has shifted. They're out there now, living their own lives, circling their own priorities. And somewhere along the way, you've been left on the edge, spinning in silence. It's tempting to respond by shrinking, by making yourself smaller, quieter, ever more available in the hope that maybe, just maybe, they'll notice you again. But here's the truth that changes everything. You don't have to chase their love. You can attract it. And not by begging or waiting or trying harder, but by becoming someone they want to be around, someone they're curious about, inspired by, drawn to. That's what I call being a magnet parent. Let me tell you about Carol. She's in her late 60s. 2 grown kids, both busy with work and families. For years, they only called when they needed something. Tax help, babysitting, a casserole for a potluck. Carol was always ready, always giving. But it hurt. Deep down, it hurt that no one ever called just to talk. Just to ask, "How are you, Mom?" One day, something shifted. Carol saw a flyer at the grocery store for a local Italian cooking class. It had been years since she did something just for herself. On a whim, she signed up. She showed up that first day nervous, a little unsure, but something awakened in her. She started sharing photos of her dishes on Facebook. She practiced at home. She smiled more. One weekend, her daughter dropped by unannounced and saw her rolling out fresh pasta dough on the kitchen counter. "What are you doing, Mom?" she asked. Carol laughed. "Making ravioli? Want to join me?" That night, they cooked together, talked, laughed, cried a little, and slowly the visits became more frequent. Her son came next, then the grandkids. Not for favors, but for time. Because suddenly, Carol's life wasn't something they took for granted. It was something they wanted to be part of. That's the power of becoming a magnet parent. Joy is contagious. Energy is magnetic. And no one is drawn to someone who spends their days just waiting by the phone. So I want to ask you, what lights you up these days? What have you let go of or put off or quietly mourned as a younger person's game? Because the truth is, there's no expiration date on passion, on purpose, on adventure. Maybe it's painting, maybe it's travel, maybe it's dancing or gardening, or starting that memoir you've always thought about. You don't need permission to come alive again. In fact, doing so might be the very thing that reignites your connection with your adult children. Because when you stop orbiting around them and start moving in your own direction, they notice. They admire you. They want to spend time with you, not out of guilt or duty, but out of curiosity and admiration. And here's something even more important. You become happier. You stop measuring your worth by how often the phone rings and start measuring it by how much joy you create in your day. You stop feeling like an afterthought and start remembering what it means to be you. Not just mom or dad or grandma or grandpa, but the full, vibrant person who existed long before anyone ever needed anything from you. That shift, it changes everything. You don't have to do anything dramatic. You don't have to pack your bags and move to Italy like in the movies. Though if you do, please send us a postcard. You just need to start with one small thing that's yours. Pick up the book you've been meaning to read. Say yes to the lunch invitation you usually turn down. Sign up for that art class, that nature hike, that beginner's yoga. Let your kids wonder, what's Mom up to these days? Let them miss you. Because here's the twist. They'll start showing up more when you stop waiting around for them. Not because you manipulated them, but because you modeled what a full, meaningful life looks like. You showed them that growing older doesn't mean fading away. It means evolving, expanding, shining in new and beautiful ways. And don't be surprised when your adult children start turning to you for inspiration. They might not say it out loud, but they'll feel it. In the way they start calling more. In the way they linger a little longer after visits. In the way they look at you, not with pity or distance, but with admiration. You see, most adult children want to feel close to their parents. They just don't know how. They get caught up. They feel awkward. They assume you're fine. And if all they hear from you is disappointment or sadness, they may pull further away. Not because they don't care, but because they don't know how to handle that guilt. But when they see you smiling, busy, curious, when they see that sparkle in your eye again, they feel safe to return. They're drawn in, not out of obligation, but out of love. So this week, I want you to choose one thing to do just for yourself, not to prove a point, not to make your kids feel bad, but to remind you that your story isn't over. You are still becoming. You are still blooming. And the more fully you live, the more naturally the people around you, your children included, will want to step back into your light. Because respect is never reclaimed through guilt. It's reignited through joy. You can't force your children to prioritize you, but you can inspire them to, by living fully, by speaking wisely, by showing up as someone whose time, words, and life carry weight. You don't have to wait for permission. You don't need to earn back their love. You already have value, right now, as you are. And the moment you stop chasing after their attention and start turning inward, toward your own passions, your own peace, your own purpose, something incredible happens. You stop feeling like you don't matter. Because suddenly, you do. To yourself first. And, in time, to them again, too. Maybe no one tells you this when your children are grown, but here it is now. Your worth didn't retire when they moved out. It didn't fade when they stopped asking for advice. And it doesn't disappear just because they stopped calling as often as they used to. The love you gave, the kind that sacrificed sleep, comfort, time, and identity, was real, deep, life-changing, and none of it was wasted. But here's something that many wise, loving parents learn too late. Love isn't a transaction. And respect, it's not a reward for good parenting. It's something that evolves, something that must be nurtured, not with guilt, not with lectures, but with boundaries, with dignity, with quiet strength. Because no matter how much you've done for your children, the truth is, they don't owe you their lives, but they do owe you respect. And if they've forgotten that, it's not because you failed. It's because somewhere along the line, the relationship stopped evolving. That's what all of this has been about. Not chasing love, not demanding attention, but becoming someone who is magnetic again. Not because of what you do for them, but because of who you are when you stand tall in your own light. And here's the beautiful part. It's never too late to shift things. Maybe you've already started. Maybe you've taken that breath and said no when you used to say yes. Maybe you've let the phone ring and chosen to go for a walk instead. Maybe you've started cooking again, or dancing, or reading in the quiet of your home. Not because someone was watching, but because you remembered what it feels like to be you again. And maybe, just maybe, you've noticed a shift. In them. In you. In the space between. Because love rooted in self-respect is the kind that lasts. It's not desperate. It's grounded. It doesn't demand. It invites. It doesn't cling. It inspires. And that more than anything is what adult children need. Even when they don't say it. They don't need you to be endlessly available. They don't need you to remind them of what they forgot. They don't even need you to fix their problems or pave their path anymore. What they need is to see you living with joy, with purpose, with quiet confidence. They need to feel the calm of your presence, not the pressure of your disappointment. Because here's what no one talks about. When your children see you living well, loving yourself, protecting your peace, they feel safe. They feel inspired. They feel proud. And that pride turns into a new kind of love. The adult kind. The real kind. Not based on roles or rules or routines, but on mutual respect. It won't happen overnight. But the change begins the moment you begin. Not by doing more, but by being more present. Not by waiting around, but by walking forward. Not by raising your voice, but by raising your standard. You may never get the apology you hoped for. You may never hear them say, "I didn't realize how much you meant to me." But you'll feel it in the tone of their voice, in the length of their hugs, in the way they start calling more, stopping by, asking questions. And if that doesn't come right away, or even at all, you'll still have yourself. And that's something sacred. Because you didn't come this far just to fade quietly into the background of someone else's life. You came this far to become, again and again, not just a parent, not just a helper, but a whole, radiant, remarkable human being. So here's what I want you to carry with you, not just from this video, but into the days ahead. You are not an afterthought. You are not forgotten. You are not waiting to matter again. You do matter. Now. Always. And every time you choose to protect your time. Every time you say less but mean more. Every time you step into something that brings you joy. You reclaim another piece of yourself. And in doing so, you create a life your children might just want to step back into. Not out of guilt, but because it feels good to be near you. Because you've become the kind of person whose love is a gift, not an obligation. Whose presence is a privilege, not a demand. And that is the kind of love that changes everything. So let me ask you, what's one thing you can do this week just for you? Not to send a message, not to teach a lesson, but to remind yourself that you are worthy of love, attention, and admiration, whether or not it comes from your kids. Write it down. Share it in the comments. Tell someone. Let it be real. Maybe it's a solo trip to the farmer's market. Maybe it's dusting off that old sketchbook. Maybe it's finally saying no to something that drains you and yes to something that fills you up. Whatever it is, do it. Not later. Not when things change. Now. Because the most powerful way to be loved is to love yourself enough first. And if you've made it this far in the video, thank you. This space, this strong elderly life community, is a place where your wisdom is honored, your experience matters, and your growth never stops. If this message spoke to you today, take a moment to let us know in the comments. What part hit home? What shift are you ready to make? And if you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear these words today. You're not alone. You are deeply worthy. And you are stronger than you think. Here's to living your most empowered chapter yet, on your terms, with dignity, and surrounded by the kind of love that starts within. We'll see you in the next video. Until then, keep growing. You're doing better than you know.